Welcome to Higher Learning. I am your host, Oz Rashid. This is more than just a podcast. It's a front row seat to how elite leaders build the most iconic of teams. The kind of leaders who spot potential that others overlook, who build cultures people don't want to leave, who set the bar, then raise it. Work and how we work is evolving at a rapid pace like no time in history. Our guests will give you insights on how to stay out in front when it comes to all things talent, leadership, management, artificial intelligence, and developing the skills that actually matter. Whether you're a founder, hiring manager, or just obsessed with building teams the right way, this is your spot. If it's your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button, drop a rating, tell a friend who gets it. To our longtime listeners, we appreciate you. Thanks for the continued support. Now, let's get into it. All right, listeners, today we are joined by a very special guest. We're joined by Astad Dhunjisha. He's the Vice President of Human Resources at AT&T, where he owns all of talent acquisition, frontline learning and development for a Fortune 40 company that hires over 25,000 people a year. You heard that right. Before AT&T, he was the global SVP of talent acquisition and HR at Experian, with operations across North America, Europe, Latin America, and Asia Pac. Prior to that, he led various global HR functions at Bayer, Corp Science, and Monsanto in a career spanning 14 years. His career also spans 2 continents, multiple industries, and significant workforce transformation in corporate America over the last 20 years. But what I really love about Astad is the journey to get to that point, not necessarily where he's at. He started his career in Mumbai. He earned a master's from the London School of Economics, moved to the States in 2009 with just 2 bags, and built his way to lead one of the largest talent operations in the connectivity world. He knows what it feels like to be an outsider, and that shapes how he thinks about hiring, inclusion, and what people actually need to do their best work. If you lead a talent function, run a people team, work with talent acquisition, or trying to figure out how AI is about to change the way your company hires, this episode's for you. Astad, how the heck are you doing?
I am doing good, Oz. That's a bit embarrassing, but I'm happy to be joining you.
Listen, I can't make any of that stuff up. That's all your story. So we try to highlight and make sure people know why you're somebody worth listening to, and you certainly have the bona fides. I'm so excited about this episode. Before we get into it, though, I got to ask you, you're wearing a t-shirt, 150 on it, 150 years of connectivity. Tell me the story about what's going on. Why are you wearing that shirt?
Well, we've got a special day here today at AT&T. It's March 10th, and this is the 150th anniversary of the very first phone call. So I can date myself, but we've all heard those stories in school where Alexander Graham Bell invented the device and he spoke into it saying, "Hey, Mr. Watson, please come here." And that is happened exactly today out in a small workshop in New Jersey. And that was the genesis of what became AT&T as a company. And it's amazing how relevant that invention still remains. That was the birth point of true electronic connectivity.
Really? Looking back now, the most important invention maybe in history, because the television for so long was seen as like this incredible means, and then the computer.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, the telephone now is so much more than just a device to call people. It's
Exactly.
literally, for better or for worse, trapped to our hands and our medium to the rest of the world and the way we stay connected. So what an amazing thing to bring up. 150 years. We're getting ready to celebrate 250 years of our country's history on July 4th. So I'm guessing 1876, if I do the math real quickly, in March 10th.
Spot on. No, I mean, we talk about ourselves as the evolution as a company, right? And you talk about this device, which was first all about voice communication. Today, we see ourselves as a connectivity player. We joke about it quite often, right? Now, Gen Zs don't probably even prefer speaking on a phone anymore. However, the device that was created is ubiquitous, right? We always have it in our heads, whether you're seeing somebody at a restaurant, an elevator, even in that 3 seconds, it's like, hey, I'm looking at my device and staying connected to the world. So it's amazing how that invention has stayed relevant for over 150 years. Connectivity is something key. And to your point, right? In our world, we talk a little bit about connectivity as one of your fundamental rights, right? So if you think about food, shelter, all those basic needs that we have, there is a point right now we live in our society where connectivity is almost that basic nature. We have this experiment over here where we're like, hey, Just keep your phone away from you for about a couple of hours, and you start noticing people's reactions to that, right? So there's the balance that you need to find. And I think it's important to disconnect also at times, but the need to stay connected to people in our lives or the world is ever more present.
Stod, you couldn't be more spot on. It's funny that you say that about the phone calls in Gen Z. I find I'm much more of a texter or a FaceTimer, right? Or email, obviously, at this point. When
Yep.
somebody calls me, I'm like, this has to be an emergency. In fact, 9 times out of 10, the call is,
Yeah.
Oz, you've just been approved for financing. Let us get you signed up right now. And that's why I know I can screen most of my calls. So you're absolutely right. The phone has become, and connectivity in general, that word means something so different than it made when I was
Exactly.
calling my friends on landlines and kind of waiting for them to call me back or using a payphone. The world's completely changed. Let's talk about talent acquisition from this
Mm.
perspective. So you work with for a company of over 120,000 employees. You
Yes.
lead talent acquisition and frontline learning and development. So for people outside of this world, let's like, what does that actually look like on Monday morning? What does that mean?
Sure. So our Monday morning actually begins kind of Friday afternoon. But you think about our roles, the way that I would describe this role really is end-to-end talent delivery, right? So for us as a company, we have a huge presence in front of customers. We have a large business, we have about 85 million customers, which includes individuals and companies across the US and many places across the globe. And as an individual, you and I can easily relate to what that is. It is about having a mobile device, being able to be connected wherever we move. But more importantly for AT&T, we are also the nation's largest fiber connector, you know, uh, across the US. We have connected over 30 million locations in the US with our fiber network. And this is an investment that has probably cost this company over 25 plus billion dollars. So we're one of those few companies that is actually investing in physical assets, putting fiber across the US and connecting home. And typically, the way you and I are doing this call right now, and why it runs half as smoothly as it does, is because we don't have to rely on wireless networks. We are relying on fiber for most of it. And that's that smoothness that comes into it. So think about that. Think about serving 85 million plus customers. And that requires a set of retail stores, call centers. You talk about people in our AT&T, we probably call it our AT&T white and blue van that go and actually install fiber at people's homes. And that is the bulk of the recruiting that we do. Now, we also, I would say at AT&T, we are in this beautiful world of truly being a technology company in so many ways, right? You think about networks today, it is about the amount of software that drives traffic and the amount of traffic that goes on our network. We estimate that we have almost 20% of the internet running over the AT&T network,
Wow,
at any point of time.
that's incredible.
So whether it is your entertainment, whether it is education, whether it is people like you and me doing work, you are flowing traffic onto the AT&T network. And that is why this company is one at the core of what we do across the US. But then it also links in well to kind of saying, hey, we need people to support the network. We need highly qualified engineers. We need software talent. We need frontline people in our retail stores. We need call center agents. We need technicians fixing lines wherever they get eaten up by a squirrel or broken down somewhere. All of those kind of things come into the bulk of what we plan for. And I love the role that we're in because when you think about the talent we bring in, we got to make them and we got to skill them up to the level that they can service the customer. We always put the customer first, period. And being able to service the customer requires this talent engine to work really smoothly. If you're a customer and you call up an AT&T call center and you do not get answered in 5 minutes, you know it's a bad experience. You walk into a retail store and your phone's not working. You want somebody who's qualified out there who can help you with the issue that you have. And that's why what we do in talent acquisition and frontline learning becomes critical to the service that this company delivers to the customer.
That's really, really amazing. And it says a lot to why you might have joined the company in the first place. Obviously, the scope, the opportunity, the size and magnitude of the company, the impact it has on our day to day lives. But was there something specific about the strategic vision of what they wanted in terms of talent and where they wanted to take it that really kind of like, got you excited and got you kind of percolating when you took the job 4 years ago?
Sure. It's, I'll run through this journey, Oz, because for me, when I first got called by AT&T for this opportunity, I was actually a bit surprised because I had been living and working in St. Louis. I had known a lot of colleagues in AT&T, and AT&T has been a place which was classically seen as insular. It was seen as a place where people joined at the front end and then they spent a long time in their career, probably 15, 20 years, and then they retired from AT&T. So it was seen as that. So when I was approached for a leadership role at AT&T, I was almost kind of half curious, half surprised, like you're I don't usually hear about AT&T in the market that much, especially for senior roles. But at that point of time, I said, okay, let's talk about it.
And just what a profile of leadership, right? You know, the curiosity, the homework, the action orientation towards and bias towards talent. I love it. It's amazing. It's no a question why AT&T's had the success it's had over the recent past. And listen, I'm a little bit biased because I am an AT&T customer. They were one of the first companies of our customers of our company, MSH, back in 2012. There was a digital life program around the Internet of Things in the home and the home connectivity that we helped. It was in Atlanta, subdivision, obviously, of AT&T corporate, that we helped kind of staff that up as well. And so I know the company. I followed it like every company over any long enough time on, especially one in where the industry is transforming and innovating in such a way where you have to pick a lane. You have to figure out who you are. And it's the companies that try to be everything to everybody that ultimately don't succeed. And so it's a great organization. I know that from working with you and from my own experience with it, but I also know that it takes great leadership to understand the importance of talent and make those tough decisions, even in the times when they might not pay off over the long term. They lead to the longer term health of the company. I want to ask you a little bit about because here's my thesis. I got into this space. I started in technology. And I started doing some research because I had some bad experiences working with talent acquisition and talent acquisition agencies and looking at the technology. And I was just kind of like, what's going on in this space? Like, this is like a really critical function of any organization or any person's life. And it just didn't seem like a lot of intellectuals had spent a lot of time in the space, or if they did, they moved into broader HR or moved out, right? So I'm just interested, like, I'm really impressed with your background and experience, and it's been primarily talent acquisition for quite a bit of time, but just talent in general. How did you get into this space? Was it you? I mean, you weren't a young boy in Mumbai that was thinking, I want to get into recruiting. Like, how did you actually take the journey to get to where you're at now?
So this is a conversation I've had with a bunch of my TA colleagues over some time, and you said something that kind of hit me directly here, right? I didn't grow up saying, hey, this is where I want to spend my career in talent acquisition. Now, let's contrast that to the other fact. If you think about HR across, HR is a function that exists across almost every single company. If you think about a startup, literally the first employees they will ever hire in HR will probably be a recruiter because they need to build up talent, right? If you think about in any HR department, recruiters usually typically form either 25 to 35% of the employee force, right? So you know what? You're going to need a lot more recruiters than you probably will need HR business partners or compensation people or benefits people, right? You'll probably there. And yet, what I found fascinating is this was not a space where anybody's, even today, how many master's programs would you say, hey, I did a master's in HR. I didn't do a master's in talent acquisition. I didn't do a
Can I just interject one thing real quickly there? So totally agree with you. Okay. Usually people get into recruiting because they failed out of business school or maybe didn't get a real estate license. So it's like, this is where I landed, which I did research on and learned a lot about. We've taken a completely different model with our own company. But to your point, we had an office in Medellin, Colombia, and we hired people back there in 2015. And it was some of the most talented people that I've ever hired. Do you know why? They had master's degrees in talent acquisition and talent. It was looked at as a specialization and expertise that you don't see here in the United States. And thus the caliber of people we were getting was so great. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like,
and I reflect on that. I mean, I was recently at the University of Texas, Dallas, where I was invited by a professor who was teaching a class on talent acquisition. And this was something that did not even exist, right, in the university landscape till a couple of years ago. And, I just did a quick kind of chat GPT, Gemini search on how many TA professionals exist in the US today. And there isn't great data on that as well, right? You have some data from SHRM and a few others. And it fascinates me that in an area that every company sees so critical, they will say talent is important. We need to hire the actually best and brightest, right? The investment in talent acquisition tends to be minimal. And the other thing which I find is talent acquisition leadership tends to be buried deep into some structure where are they at the HR table and do they have a voice in what they're seeing in the marketplace? Now, I'll contrast this to another thing. What I enjoy about talent acquisition is talent acquisition is also the one place that I feel, hey, you can't BS this stuff. Either you hire a person or you don't, right? I talk about another function like that in the corporate world is sales. You have to interact with the external world. You have to find that person and you have to bring them in. I cannot say that either we hired a person and we filled the seat or we did not. There is no, well, I got 60% of the way, right? I got an offer. Well, guess what? I made an offer. Person didn't join. I'm back to square one. And I feel like that is an underappreciated part about talent acquisition where you operate in the marketplace. And I talk about our team as similar to a sales team. We have our monthly targets. We got to get things done. It is mission critical. And if we don't do that, the operation doesn't succeed. And that kind of pressure, I don't feel is felt in other parts of HR as much, right? Hey, in other places, you're like, okay, I can get away with something. I'm going to do a performance management review. 80% of our people don't, finish their goals, but 20% don't. I'll still think of that as a good year. If we only did 80% of the hiring we needed to do and missed out 20%, the organization would be running and jumping.
And now we're just like two guys in the space talking about it, but there's just such a dissonance there that doesn't make any sense to me. There's a bunch of different aspects of it. Okay. Number one, like you said with sales, there's very ones and zeros in terms of, but you serve so many masters, right? In an organization. And it's just really hard to be able to it's like asking a salesperson to be able to sell across every service line, every product, every industry, right? And then when they're not 100% in each single one of them, then you slap them on the wrist and you don't remember the 8 out of the 10 times they got it right. So that's one aspect of it. It's a very hard job from that perspective.
Right.
The second aspect of it is, I don't think that because there's not a formal education, people don't look at it as an expertise. That is insane to me. And let me tell you what I mean. So building AI-based software, and one of the things I'm doing is gamifying things for managers, for interviewers, because it makes zero sense to me that this isn't looked at as a skill or expertise, that you wouldn't have a black belt in this, that you wouldn't have a certification in this, because we all agree that there's best practices, there's ways of doing it, there are others that are better than others. But here's the problem. Everybody thinks they're amazing at hiring and recruiting, and the data does not back that up even a little bit. And so it's this dissonance of people thinking like, oh, I recruit, I do that, I'm great at hiring, I know what I'm doing. And the reality just isn't there. And the people who are good at it tend to have 10, 15, 20 years of experience, reps, frameworks, rubrics that they work with. Guess what else that's the case with? Karate, electricians, psychology, whatever. Like I could go on for a bunch of other things that we have degrees and expertises in and all these different things. And yet for our world, it's just looked at as kind of like this throwaway almost. And that's one of the things that was so hard for me getting into the industry. We took a very different approach. We were consultative and advisory. It was different. It felt different. But the biggest problem I had was the stigma of walking in, right? And knowing that they've had bad experiences before. And I have to break it down and be like, it's not going to be that way. This is different this time. Same thing when we hire people. Sometimes when people graduate with a different degree and we say, hey, listen, you can come here and you can make this type of money and have this type of impact and really change people's lives, change economies' lives, change companies, right? And then it's like, well, recruiting, I don't know. So anyway, it's like we got to break down these barriers. In my opinion, and I've said this before, it's a lot like marketing. You get an opportunity, you market it out to the world, you get people excited. There's maybe a little bit of sales there, but just like in any good sales, you're not giving people something they don't want. You're aligning needs, right, with people, right? That's what a great salesperson does, right? And then once you have the candidate, you're marketing them back up to your organization and saying why you think this person is such a great, because based on what they told you was important. And marketing gets huge budgets and huge, pats on the back. So anyway, like I said, we sound like a couple of spinsters here complaining, but
I see that. And for me, there was a fact that I had read about earlier, and particularly related to the space that you're in. For me, the market kind of recognized the value in hiring because of it being such a critical HR process. A number of startups that have been emerging in the HR TA space was more than all other areas of HR. And I found that fascinating. So I'm sure like you, like, hey, you talk to a lot of industry professionals and you see how many new companies and ideas come up. And especially now, right? When you think about AI, how many times in your world are you hearing about virtual interviews? How often are you hearing about virtual sourcing? How often are you hearing about virtual candidate engagement, automatic offers, right? That is becoming the reality. And more startups and more industries are investing in this space. And I see it as many other places in HR. Nobody else is going and saying, hey, let me make a new AI-based compensation system, right? But they are spending a ton of money because they know also, right? There is a huge amount of investment in TA, and companies spend a lot of money in talent acquisition, right?
Let me take that to you from one other angle. And that's exactly why I'm in the space. I started building software 3 years ago because I saw the problem up front. The same things that happened in every talent acquisition and HR organization, the same thing that happened with managers and interviewers. We wanted to design a solution that we were delivering from a services perspective, but we knew through technology and AI, we could really democratize great hiring and bring everybody up to a certain level of efficacy here on something that has a bottom line impact and is so important. But it's not, I'll point, I think one of the problems is this, and then we can jump off because I know we've been going on this for a little bit of a tangent. But if you think about like the last 30 years, if you look at the businesses that have been opened up the most, right? Agencies are pretty high on the list. Why? Low barriers of entry to get in, right? You can need a computer and a laptop and a laptop and a phone is what the joke is, right? And then
Right.
unfortunately, and I did a lot of research on this before getting into it too, it's a great business model. It can spin off cash. It's going to be highly profitable. You can drive your top line. So it drives a lot of the wrong incentive structure. And that's why you see a lot of these agencies are so commoditized and transactional because the business has been built on this idea of throw a bunch up on the wall, see what sticks, hire 4 to fire 2, hit your KPIs and numbers. And to me, like, yeah, there's some validity to that stuff. It obviously makes for a good business model, but it doesn't lead to a good candidate experience. It doesn't lead to a good customer experience. It doesn't being looked at as you being a real partner. It looks at like you're just like somebody that's trying to sell a used jalopy and get off the site, right? Because the minute the person's, and that's why the incentive model is all messed up. The minute somebody starts is when you charge them, right? So what is your incentive as a business, as an agency then? To get them through the process to start, not a year later, were they the right fit? Did they get promoted? Which is how our company built the business. So anyway, I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's been viewed the way it's been for so long. And I agree with you. What an exciting time, because a lot of people realize, like myself, there's so much opportunity here. And I think the importance has gone up as time has gone on. And that's why technology is going to play such a big role in everything that happens over the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. And for me, taking even a point deeper, right? As we talk, you talked about those degrees, the appreciation for the expertise it takes to be in talent acquisition, right? And manage this as a process as at scale. And then you think about the high end of it, right? You think about the fees that your big firms, whether it's Russell Reynolds, Spencer Stewart, Korn Ferry earn, right? There is that huge niche at the very top of the market where it becomes a lot of networks, relationships. There is so much value to be captured through this process. So couldn't agree with you more.
Finding the right talent for your team doesn't have to be a struggle. Meet Aon Hire, the world's first hiring experience management platform designed to transform the way you hire. Powered by AI, Aon Hire takes the hassle out of every step in the process. From smart resume analysis to customized interview questions, it saves you time, money, and effort. Plus, with real-time insights from every interview, you can quickly identify top candidates, reduce turnover, and stay on budget. And forget about note-taking, Aon Hire takes care of that for you. Ready to revolutionize your hiring process? Visit aonhire.com and get started today.
Love that. All right, let's go in a little bit of a different direction. One of the things that I was so excited to bring you on and talk to you about is I saw one of your keynotes at FBLA about leading on the line. I'm not in no notes. Just you tell us about that topic and why you think that's important. What's leading on the line?
Sure. So the way I would describe this, odds for me, having spent, the last 15 years or so plus in my career in leadership, right? It became this conversation that I have one when I'm interviewing leaders and trying to figure out what is it that makes great leaders tick, right? What, a little bit of the secret sauce and the part that nobody has it completely figured out is even the best recruiter is batting, 6-6. It's if you get it right 2 out of 3 times, I would consider you to be a phenomenal recruiter, right? I mean, feel free to challenge me over there, but that has been my lived experience, whether it's at a senior executive level or junior, right? We are always trying to find out and figure out what is the person doing or what makes truly a good leader. And part of it, this in that conversation which emerged was what is that leadership? And there are millions of articles and books and things like that written out there. But the part which constantly remains on leadership was leadership is about balancing between contradictions. It is about walking a line, because what can be exhausting about leadership is you're always in the spotlight. You're always walking a straight and narrow. And good leaders, if you overrotate on one thing or another, things don't go so well. And a little bit of this is the life lesson, right? It's that, hey, if I am being strategic all the time, guess what? I'm going to get criticized for not being in the details and something slipping up. If I am, being decisive, if I'm constantly thinking, hey, do this, do that, am I truly embracing ambiguity? Am I showing up as confident leader, right? Hey, I'm always like showcasing a lot of confidence. The flip side to that is, are you vulnerable? Are you able to, meet people where they are? So there's that sense of constantly walking those lines of balancing between multiple priorities that take place in leadership. If you just operate with one style that is inflexible, you will find yourself hitting roadblocks. You will find yourself derailing your career as a leader, and you will find yourself getting a lot of feedback. And then the tendency is not to overcorrect and find yourself flipping on the other side. And that's been a constant conversation I've had both with leaders internally here at AT&T. I've had it with a lot of my colleagues. And when I talk to people who are in positions of great responsibility, they talk about the exhaustion that sometimes comes with leadership. There's an excitement, there's, the joy of it. But along with that comes in being able to constantly walk and balance multiple priorities, and being able to and people who do that effectively over a period of time, because this is a marathon. This is not about hitting one quarter. This is about doing it consistently, day on day, week on week, month on month. And just when you think everything is working out just fine, just when you think it's going to be quite better, my numbers are being achieved, this is being hit, the next crisis comes and hits you. The model starts wobbling, and you got to be walking that tightrope all over it. So for me, it's a culmination of some of those factors. How do you innovate? How do you operate? How do you be strategic? But then how do you be tactical? How do you continue to, collaborate and compete, right? Those are the kind of contradictions that we always face in leadership roles.
I love the way you articulated that. I've told people for a long time that I feel like I'm a walking contradiction in a lot of ways. In that sometimes I'm very analytical and other times I will be super spontaneous. There's times where I grew up being the operational leader for our company, but I've had to shift into a more strategic role. And I always had that in me, but you have to know when to wear what hat and when that matters, right? There's a certain level of, knowing when to hold people to a high standard and when to put your arm around them. And so like me as a leader is a fluid concept. What I deeply believe is that you have baseline foundational values that you don't change. Because if you're constantly just swaying in the wind on everything and going this direction and this direction, there's no respect in that. There's no consistency in that. That's a whole other sign of being a bad leader. But at the same time, understanding your audience, understanding what situation demands, having the ability to be able to go back and forth, right? Another one is like, I talk a lot. I got a lot of opinions, but I do think I'm a pretty engaged listener and that I'm processing a lot when people are talking. That seems like a contradiction. I just feel like the key is in the gray area. And I'm certainly have a lot of work to do on that. But I love the way you articulated it because it kind of hit home with me in a lot of ways because I've always felt like I have that contradiction about me. The other thing you said is you kept bringing it up about being a manager and leader. God, it sounds a lot like being a parent too, right? Knowing that, and knowing that ebb and flow of when to be this or that. And then the other side of that is, you usually don't have co-CEOs. That usually doesn't work out too well. You do have two parents in a lot of situations. And so I find myself having to balance the leadership of my wife. And if she's this, then I have to be this. And that contradiction plays there too, right?
Believe me, as I have a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I play that battle here and there each and every day. And it is interesting how we choose different roles. The part about this, which I also think you talked about one being your principled as a leader, right? If you just weigh and do that, there's no respect there. But in the midst of trying to balance that, it's about how do you find sustenance for yourself, right? Who you are, your well-being, and how you are as a person. Because, you know, we as leaders have to show up for our teams and our people every single day. We as leaders, like, hey, you're either, you're reporting to a board, or you're reporting to your investors, or you're reporting to your manager. So you have somebody up in your hierarchy, and then you got a team down in your hierarchy. And by the way, you also got to manage your peers, right? So all those kind of things take a lot out of a person. Now, some people may embrace it. Some are workaholics. Some are like, hey, I get up at like 4 a.m. and I work out for 3 hours, and then I get that done. I'm like, hey, normal people, the normal leaders still have to do their laundry, still have to go out and get, gas their car. And it's finding that balance and all of that and sustaining yourself and your emotions and your energy, which I think is really, really important.
Very, very, very good call out. I'm glad you brought that up. There's a lot of people listening that needed to hear that. And you're right. That can be the contradiction too, right? It's not about 80 hours all the time intensity, because then you burn out. Then you're not able to do your best work. I totally agree with that. You've got to have that balance. The balance is the key to everything. I tell my kids all the time, most things in moderation are going to be okay. You just got to find that moderate blend, right? All right. I want to talk a little bit about talent, because I'm excited to hear some of your thoughts and points of view on this. Let's start here. Core hiring philosophy, whether it be what you would say to a leader at AT&T that's hiring, or maybe even for your own team. What is a core hiring philosophy you've had that's worked for you?
So for me, a core hiring philosophy, when I think about it, is one, I want to get and understand the story of the person, right? That for me is at the core. Every person represents certain choices that they've made. If I can understand those set of choices and how they go about making them, I feel that I'm in a better position to make a judgment whether they're a good fit at the company or not. That's number one. Number two is, experience is important, right? Especially when you're hiring into leadership roles and senior roles across. But you think about how people lead and what kind of attitude they bring to the table. And even the best of us I call it, is rotate on the resume too often, where you're looking for those experiences and you're trying to feel, your way through the resume and make sure, and you try and say, hey, if this person has done this at this company, that means they have to have been good. And too often, more than not, it could be surprising where you find yourself either underwhelmed by some people who've had incredible resumes, but you may find somebody who is outstanding at what you want, but who didn't show up, or you didn't see it on paper as something where you said, wow, this person amazed me. So I think that finding that balance of talent is hard, and especially training hiring managers to do that is really hard. The good thing about this is, what kind of an ecosystem do you create around the person to ensure that they're successful? Because, I talk to my hiring leaders all the time, where you can bring in the absolute next Steve Jobs or the next Tim Cooks, or, the top leaders, but you put them into an environment where they do not have the support systems, they do not have the onboarding or the leadership support to work, they are not going to succeed. I mean, I'm a true believer that everybody at the top is a product of, one, their own capabilities, but two, the environment that nurtured them, and sponsors and mentors that took them to the level that they are at. And I feel like that is a combination that I also try and look through in the hiring process to say, how do they cultivate that? And how do they cultivate those relationships around them, right? That is, for me, a bigger predictor of longer term success than somebody who showcases intellectual genius or a spark on that front. So those are different examples.
Yeah, you said something really smart there. I mean, a lot of things there, but one thing that really stood out to me is the ecosystem and environment that you're in, and how does that person fit within that? I think that is such a, we just look at individual talent, and we don't really always think about the team that they're coming into and what the gaps are there, what my management style is, what my organization is like, how are they going to fit within those things? And that's a mistake they make in sports all the time too, right? Like this idea of like, Tom Brady gets drafted by anybody, he's going to be Tom Brady. Maybe, or maybe they had just the right environment for him to come in there and be that best level, maximum level of himself. And that's where your ability to understand your environment and have impact on what that environment is to get the best out of people is such an unlock that's irrespective of the quality of the individual talent you bring in, which I also think is very important, but it's like a puzzle piece. And I think people miss that. They just look at, you can, like you said, you can bring in the next Steve Jobs, but I don't know, maybe Steve Jobs isn't the best CEO at AT&T or, a retail
Exactly.
place or something like that. A lot of times the environment and the situation is what ends up making these big legends or these stories that we follow. So spot on there.
I'll build on that as one of my favorite stories is, you study teams that went on these buying sprees and assembled some of the most talented rosters. And there is actually, statistics that show that the teams that filled themselves up with these super talented rosters but didn't have a system failed more often than teams that actually build a roster with good talent, because that is absolutely critical, but then ensure that they had a proper system where they succeeded. And, there is an example of using a soccer example in Europe, or Real Madrid with some of the Galacticos, and they had this incredible, bought every single superstar, and yet they didn't have half as many titles as some other teams that had a couple of good stars, and then they had a great system. And I think that's a lesson from sports. And I know that here we are two guys, we have to almost like always get deviated into sports. But for me, there's some amazing lessons because of how you find talent, how you cultivate it, and how you grow in a homegrown
It
system.
doesn't work in sports and it doesn't work in corporate America. And it's so funny you made the Real Madrid Galacticos comparison, because today, one of my team members is a huge Real Madrid fan, and Champions League is going on today. I'm a big Liverpool fan. And we were talking about how even their current team today is a bunch of individual stars like Mbappe and Vinicius and all these different guys, but they don't play well together. The sum of the parts don't make sense, and thus they might not even get a trophy this year. So we took a little soccer interlude there, but it's proven that just bringing in a bunch of great individuals and trying to bring them all together, this isn't the Avengers. Like, you got to have a situation where the sum is greater than the parts, and the best organizations, the best teams get that, what works and what doesn't. Let me ask you this. Memorable interview experience? Maybe you were interviewing or you were interviewing somebody. No, you don't have to name names, but I'm just interested in what comes to mind.
Well, so I started my career in campus recruiting, right? So I was running a couple of campus programs. This was very early in my career, but it kind of opened my eyes to people. It goes back to something you and I discussed a few minutes ago, right? I recall this very distinctly, where I was at this very prestigious university out in India. I had probably about 20 plus candidates to interview in one day. So, we were like, let's move. I remember looking through the resumes, and I was seeing like, here was really good resumes, and then there were some average resumes, and, we were going through a lot of it. I interviewed a lot of the guys with the great resumes, and I was kind of a little bit more underwhelmed. And then I find this one other guy, and I interview him. And in interviewing, right, we always look, it's a human tendency, and this is psychology. We make our impression in the first 35 seconds to a minute, right? And then we spend a lot of the time kind of validating the rest of it, right? Validating our impression. And I remember this guy in the first minute or so did not overwhelm me. I was kind of like, okay, let's end this quickly. And yet, as we got talking, you could see the depth of that person emerge and emerge and emerge. And I remember ending that interview, flipping my mind. What stayed with me was, it was the first time I found myself flipping my mind, where I started with a red, turned it over to a green. I then easily took the person's resume, walked into the next room, told my counterpart, interview this guy. Am I just crazy, or do you see this guy? My counterpart interviews him. 15 minutes later, we're like, let's get that offer out there, right? Yeah. And it was something that struck with me even till this day, where I try and hold myself from judgment initially, because it was the first time I learned, like, hey, we all grew up, when you're young, you're cocky, you think you know the world, you feel like you have those experiences. But it taught me to catch myself and ask those questions. And I still find myself today pushing myself to, question my judgment, pushing a bit deeper. And I will still say that I think I've done maybe 1,000+ interviews in my career. I feel I do this well, but I do need to catch myself at times and figure out where true talent is, and am I being the right judge at that moment?
I love that you say that. I don't know if I should share this, but I'm going to do it anyway. We
Yeah.
recently just hired a new sales leader in our India office out of Bangalore. And um, she went through the interview process and got a lot of plaudits from a lot of people that I thought really knew what they were talking about. And I went into the video interview and she was wearing a unicorn pink t-shirt, bright, for the interview. And I sat there at the beginning of the interview. The first thought that came into my head was, she didn't take the CEO interview very seriously, or how she just came in a t-shirt and just. I was like,
Nope.
okay, I'm going to try to keep it in mind. And I got to tell you what, one of the best interviews, completely blew the doors off of everything. She was everything that people said. We'll see how it ends up working out in practice. But to your point, like, it's really hard sometimes to like get rid of that first impression because you start to, like you said, you start to reinforce and validate it based on what comes happen. And I think, again, going back to interviewing being a real expertise and skill is being able to suspend, right, any initial thoughts or anything like that, or this person's a lot like me, or they went to the same school as me, or, they worked at a company that I know, so we have similar experiences. Suspend those beliefs, collect data points, and not make judgments that leads
Right.
to great hiring. So I love that story. Thank you for sharing that. What is the favorite question you like to ask in interviews? Does any come to mind? We're giving away the secret sauce here.
I would say that this is a question I always ask. I don't think it's really unique in so many ways, but I do think that it leads to a discovery path that I think if you're a good interviewer, you can ask follow-up questions and get deeper. And the question is pretty simple. Tell me about a time that challenged you the most or where you had to struggle and how you dealt with it. For me, the choice of example that people use is really telling. There are some people who are trying to disguise it, and they'll try and talk about a success disguised as failure, which you can get through. And then you say, okay, is there truly some depth to this person? Some others can be very honest, but then you're like, do they have the capacity to deal with failure or deal with setbacks? Because there is a reality. We're not going to be successful all that point of time. And then seeing how they deal with that and, what they come up with and how much ownership do they show or how much deflection do they, create is also very telling, right? So this is one of those questions where, like, look, you can prepare for it, but like in any interview process, like in any question, the question itself has no special, value. It's how you follow up and push in those examples and get in deeper. That I find tells a lot about a person's character and their ability to work through challenges and, most importantly, resilience. Because one of the characteristics I find in any corporate job, especially at leadership, is resilience, right? How do you deal with setbacks? How do you continue to come out there? How do you continue to motivate yourself and find, victories from the lessons that you learn?
I love that. All right, I want to make sure we have enough time. I have a couple more questions, then we'll get to our lightning round. What do you see as the role of AI in talent acquisition going forward? How are you using it? How are you thinking about it?
There's a part about AI where everybody is rushing into the efficiency game, right? And I feel like the lost opportunity is where people talk about AI as, hey, I'm going to invent these agents. I'm going to put in this AI. And then guess what? I can reduce my cost by 20%, 30%. I will need fewer people. I need fewer interviewers, those kind of pieces. There's this rush towards efficiency that I think is kind of currently driving a lot of the behavior.
Which, by the way, drives a lot of the fear and a lot of the things that we see. And I think I know where you're going with this. Where is AI in abundance? Where is AI in taking things to another level? Go ahead.
Exactly. It is about, hey, instead of just saying, hey, can I just get AI to interview somebody and have the model validate whether this person is good or not? And, they do that. It is about how do I have a human AI interaction where I get more capabilities and data on the person rather than me just trying to remove the interview from the process. Number one, right? Where am I truly looking at AI in terms of, truly sourcing versus just trying to remove the sourcer from the loop? So those are the things, right? It is about true, and I mean, I will tell you the first thing is, I think all of us are challenged with it is defining what the new process or the new outcomes look like. Everybody can see the basis around that.
Thank you. We have to get out of the CFO mindset of AI and start to look at the sales mindset of AI. What opportunities are there? How can we create more? How can we bring more to the table? A lot of times when we talk about this, idea of like what it's going to do in terms of replacing tasks and jobs and things like that, everyone's looking at it as a zero-sum game. And we're not thinking about how demand will pick up and how things will change from that perspective because there's so much more productivity and capability. I've seen that firsthand. That's my attitude I take, with my team. And what we're doing is, why don't I get these smart people to have these great tools in their hands to get them to take off administrative burden, but to do it from a perspective, what more can they do now? Not how much, how much less money are we going to spend? I totally agree with you on that. And my vision for this is, and this is why what I'm building with our software is, you're sitting in your job that is a 96.2% fit for everything you care about that matters to you. And then you get an alert that says, this job is a 98.2% fit. I guess I got to go take this jump, because we're predictive in understanding what matters to us, what we're motivated by, so we can do our best work, that we feel like we have purpose in work. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have right now. And I think AI can actually be, something that takes off these shackles of burdensome, non-challenging, not feel good work, and take some of that off of our plate to do the things that are our areas of expertise, that Ikaji zone, right? That we talk about, that area of like, what do I care about? What am I good at? What can I make money at? Right. And what am I passionate about? Right. How can we find that center in our work? Because I would tell you that 95% of people are not playing in that realm. I am. I want that for everybody.
For me, there is still that next, that next true level. I mean, look, we know Gen AI is pretty ubiquitous, right? Everybody is utilizing that. But the ability of, like for me, what's exciting about, Claude and Anthropic and some of the stuff, agents, is where agents truly get to do things, not just simply summarize your calendar, summarize your emails, kind of raise certain things across over there, right? I mean, I see it as just like, we talk about the internet revolution, right? How did the internet change talent acquisition? How did it change, anything? Every industry changed because of that. Billing changed because of that. Travel industries changed because recruiting. Everybody was submitting paper resumes or emailing resumes. All of a sudden, you have the internet. Everything is one click. You click in your LinkedIn place. Tomorrow, you're going to have AI agents that can apply for jobs for you, right? It's almost a given. How are we going to be ready for that? The other part about this world, right, is going to be where, what kind of governance roles are going to be created. That make it really important that we are thoughtful in the way that we implement AI.
Such good stuff. There's so much good content here. If people aren't taking notes while listening to this podcast, they're missing out. There's so much good stuff. Last question I'm going to ask you for the lightning round. If you could give 20-year-old Astad advice that you didn't know then, but that you know now, what would you give? What would you tell him?
Well, I would say that leadership is humbling, and there will be a lot of lessons that you'll learn on the way. And I think, there's a part about setbacks being the best opportunities for the future, right? The other thing about it is, I've also learned I would learn to enjoy the journey while it's there, because I think at the moment when you're in, especially early on in your career, you're looking at saying, okay, how am I climbing this ladder? What's next? What's next? How do I get to the next level? And I've been very fortunate in my career. I've had incredible sponsors, incredible managers, incredible organizations. Those things have come along the way. I think the advice that I give to a lot of people, especially young ones, is, don't chase after just the director title or the VP title, right? Think about the experiences that you're going to collect and build on. And those experiences will ensure that you get whatever you deserve and you will reach the level of your capability.
Great advice. I love that. All right. I want to move into the lightning round as we wrap up here. I usually pick a commonality that we have. And so I'm going to ask you some questions. I'm half Indian. My mom grew up in Hyderabad. You grew up in Mumbai. So I want to ask you a few questions about kind of your growing up and some of the things that are important to you from your cultural perspective. Let's talk about Mumbai first. Do you go back to visit ever?
Every single year.
Okay. So what do you miss about, outside of the people, what do you miss about Mumbai? What's something that might surprise people that have never been there about it?
Energy, right? I mean, look, it's not an easy place to live or grow up, but the part about Mumbai that I will say is, even if you're out at 2 a.m, you could be stuck in a traffic jam. You will find people on the streets and you'll find interactions. You drive on the street in the middle of the night, you will see life around you. And I feel very few cities have that same kind of pace and energy that pretty much I would say any city in India might have.
I totally agree with you. What I tell people, as I've gone back and visited a few times now, just went back in September and visit our offices out there. I tell people that India is an assault on all five senses in a really great way, right? Sound, sight, hearing, taste, everything. It's going to be the most extreme version of all of that you've ever had. And it's funny because I went to Dubai and then I went to Calcutta and our team there. And the juxtaposition between, what was here versus here, but there's so much love and so much culture and so much energy, to your point, that I experienced that, I loved both places. It was amazing.
You use the word I literally always use, which is assault on the senses. I agree with India is an assault on the senses. And I find, I'll put it like this. I see places in the world where, somebody goes to Paris or something like that, they will find something that they enjoy, some things that they may not enjoy. A lot of people might love it. Some people may not love it too much, but they'll enjoy it to some extent. I think India tends to be polarizing. You either really appreciate and enjoy the chaos, right? And if you embrace chaos, you'll love that. The sights, the colors, the smells, the sounds, the animals, or you will hate it so much that you cannot wait to get back on the plane and leave there, right? And I've seen that very consciously with a lot of my friends who aren't Indian who visit there.
I totally agree with you. Now, for all you aspiring entrepreneurs out there, go read Steve Jobs' biography by Walter Isaacson and how he took a journey through India and that shaped a lot of who he is and his spiritual beliefs and everything like that. And then maybe you'll get the same thing. If you were telling somebody to visit, okay, what city would you tell them to go to for the quintessential India experience?
Look, I'm biased towards it. I'm biased towards Mumbai, but actually for me, I've been very fortunate and lucky where I've lived in Delhi, I've lived in Hyderabad, I have been in Bangalore, I have visited all across. I will say that kind of truly doing a road trip through a middle of nowhere India, I think is more educational and more enlightening than, I used to spend a lot of my early childhood doing road trips through rural Gujarat, just traveling way up north. And there were things and sights and sounds. And I'm sure things have changed in the last 25 years, but there were beaches out there that were serene, beautiful, completely open, nobody out there. I still feel that there are spots of India that are off the tourist track, which have incredible beauty.
I might get some notes from you on that. I really like that. Favorite Indian meal?
Kebabs.
Kebabs. Okay. Does your mom cook?
Absolutely.
Of course. My mom does too. She makes South India, some of the best biryani in the world. My family.
That is my number two. My pulao.
We'll have to get pulao and kebab.
Absolute.
Who is the Indian CEO you admire most here in the US?
For me, I would say Satya Nadella.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Why?
Here's the part that I've actually heard firsthand. So I have a lot of my colleagues who are ex-Microsoft, right? And they talk about the culture at Microsoft, and they've been there 20 plus years. So they were actually there at the, probably at the late end of Bill Gates. They stayed through the entire time where Steve Ballmer was the CEO. And they talk about the culture then of Microsoft being loud, bombastic, rash, aggressive. And in that whole mix, to find Satya Nadella, who you would not describe with any of those adjectives, continue to make his mark, continue to build what became the bread and butter key piece of Microsoft business, Azure, and build that along the way, and finally take over the reins. One, I got to give it to them for the succession planning processes, but for somebody to keep track of that and survive through that environment and come out at the top, you got to give that man credit.
He's a fantastic leader. He completely reinvented the company. It shows that the culture follows the leader because bombastic was Steve Ballmer, right? And Satya takes a very different approach. He has a son with special needs that he talks about a lot and how that shaped who he is as a leader. I love that. And of course, it's, I don't know if it's still the case, but they had the largest market cap as an organization for a very, very long time. And listen, one of the things that I'll say is I think a lot of the takes is that Ballmer was this and Satya was this. I listened to the Acquired podcast and quite religiously, and I love the Microsoft episode. And honestly, Ballmer did a lot to move them into the enterprise world where they were very consumer facing, particularly having issues with that with the FTC at the time and moving into that world. So he deserves a little more credit than he gets, but it's certainly to say that they had lost their way a little bit when Nadella came on and really reimagined the company, because it could have been like another company, like an IBM or another company where it just kind of.
The ability of that company to reinvent itself. And again, full credit to Ballmer, because I was privileged enough where I actually heard him speak live in October. And, his ability to be totally honest with himself and with everything else is incredible. He talks about a point of time where he and Bill Gates got in, when he became CEO, and he and Bill Gates didn't see eye to eye. They didn't talk to each other for almost a year. He talks about his mistakes where he did not spend any time with the investor relations community and talking about the share price and why it stagnated. He talked about his misses. He talked about, like not investing in, an open Microsoft, mobile platform. And his ability at his age to be completely honest with himself and not kind of, showcase everything was amazing. For me, credit to him. You can see why that level of transparency and honesty is so important to being a good leader, where you can say, hey, here's what we did good. Here's what we missed out.
Let's bring it back full circle. The contradiction in that, because Steve is a sales guy. He's the business. He's out in front. But the ability to be self-reflective and look back and own that, that's what makes a great leader.
Yes.
Astad, amazing episode, man. I really appreciate you coming on. So excited for you doing this. Can't wait to meet in person sometime soon.
I look forward to that, Oz. Thank you for having me.
All right. Talk to you later.